Well, I think we're going to get started. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. We really appreciate your support for 100 Miles, coming to our programs and all the other things that you do to help us. I'm really excited because I have known Paul for quite a while now, and he's one of the most fantastic educators on our coast. And so I'm so excited for him because I met him when he was the educator for coastal divisions of DNR, but now he is onto a new role in the work he is doing, and so excited. So I'm really excited for you to share that tonight.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you, 100 Miles, for hosting me. Thank y'all for being here, most importantly. Like Stephanie said, I feel like I've had 3 careers with DNR because I did a lot of finfish research where we tagged finfish. I did that for about a dozen years. About a dozen years I did education and outreach work, and for the last 5 or so years I've been working with artificial reefs and among some other things. So y'all feel free to stop me if I say something that's confusing. I am going to kind of be true to my education nature and start with 30,000 foot view of our organization, just because sometimes I feel like people don't understand maybe exactly what we do. So we are part of the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. We're a Coastal Resources Division. Our sister divisions are Parks and Law Enforcement and Environmental Protection and Wildlife Resources. And I left somebody out because there's another one, and they don't exist anymore. They got rolled into Parks. Oddly enough, I still left somebody out. I'll think about it in a minute, but I left somebody out. Anyway, they'll all be mad at me, I'm sure. I'm gonna start with this one because I was so big on this when we had all of our clear materials. I was doing that work, and because you're with 100 Miles, and because what 100 Miles does, our mission statement is to balance coastal development, protection of the coast's natural assets, socio-cultural heritage, recreational resources for the benefit of present and future generations. So I looked at y'all's mission statement this morning. So I know I've seen it before, but I wanted to see, and these things align real well. And I will tell you what's interesting about what a group like 100 Miles does versus what we do. And I'm gonna tell you a little analogy the way I see it, using the example maybe of like if like the speed limit on the interstate is 70 miles an hour, and if the speed limit on the interstate really should be 60 miles an hour because it's safer for some reason. We as an agency could make, if that was our purview, we could make recommendations, but we don't lobby. We have specific rules that DNR is not allowed to lobby. We can make recommendations to legislators. We can call attention to it maybe, but we have to be very careful in the way that we do it. But a group like 100 Miles can lobby this thing, send out mass emails like 100 Miles does, and say we need to change this thing, we need to do this thing. So I feel like we work on the opposite sides of issues. I don't mean that in an argumentative way. I mean, we work that way sometimes, that a group like 100 Miles or Omaha Riverkeeper or somebody like that can do things that we can't do, that we're not allowed to do. So I feel like we all want the same thing, but a lot of times as a state employee, I won't say our hands are tied, but we're only making those recommendations. That's what we do, right? So just so you know, our Coastal Resources Division, we talk about the 11 coastal counties. This 11 coastal counties thing, there's 159 counties in Georgia, and we claim jurisdiction over these 11 as our coastal counties. And the reason why you're a coastal county, obviously, if you're one of the first tier of 6, you know why. You're at the marshes and the beaches and all that. Second tier of 5, your county touches coastal waters or tidally influenced waters. That's why we do that. Really, it's a funny jurisdictional thing. That's how we operate. Y'all probably heard this before, but I'm gonna say it again. 368,000 acres of salt marsh. I'm very specific in the way I say this, because you hear that one number, 1/3 of all the salt marsh, and that number is, no one can ever tell me where that number comes from. But I will tell you, 368,000 acres of salt marsh. We have a significant portion of the remaining healthy salt marsh on the east coast of the United States within our 100 miles of coastline. Okay, I'll say it that way because that's very true. We have 368,000 acres of salt marsh, and South Carolina's got twice the coastline, but they've only got something like 240,000 acres of salt marsh. We talk about 3,400 miles of tidal shoreline. That's all these little creeks and rivers in here. I pulled this from Doug's presentation. He says 105 miles of beaches. Their group says 100 miles. It's somewhere near 100 miles. It's according to who wraps what into the island when you come with that number. And we administer the marsh Protection Act, and Georgia is one of the first states to have marsh protection. I tell everybody we weren't first in a lot of things, but we were first in marsh protection, 1970s when that law was passed. Shore Protection Act was 1979, protecting the beaches. And then the other two big breakouts are sort of our coastal management program and our marine fisheries. And that marine fisheries piece is Georgia law, Title 27, the Game and Fish Code, where we regulate the shrimp fishery, the fish regulations, and all of that stuff. Just a couple of bumps on some of our coastal management program. You can kind of read some of the things we do. The coastal and ocean management, that's federal dollars that come in, the Coastal Zone Management Act. Every state has a coastal zone, a coastal management program. We were one of the last states to come into that. I was actually working for DNR in 94, and we didn't adopt the Coastal Zone Management Act until sometime around 98, so I remember that. But all states have that. That's a piece of what we do. You're hearing a lot right now about shellfish and water quality with the oyster aquaculture. We've been doing clam aquaculture for a long time, but there's also, so we do take care of this. Is also the harvest. Like you can harvest oysters as an individual citizen in a public picking area with a fishing license, and I find people don't know that. And there's leases that commercial fishermen have leased where they pick oysters to then sell to people, right? So the oysters, there's a lot more to this than most people understand, because we have the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and the USDA, both are involved in that regulatory part of that, which makes that really complicated. We'll breeze over that. We don't have a lot of time for that one, but then our fisheries side of the house, I work for the Marine Fisheries Program. This is the work that we do. We do a trawl monitoring. This is about opening and closing the shrimp season. This marine sport fish population health is about fin fish. We've got a longline project that's been going on for a number of years, trying to learn more about the adult population of red drum and shark longlining. And then we have some things over here that the public can be involved in. If you catch fish at a marina that has a freezer, you can donate your carcasses to that program. We can gain a lot of information from the carcass of the fish after you have filleted it. If you have ever been interviewed while you're out fishing, we run that survey. And then also the commercial statistics. That's where when shrimpers catch shrimp or crabbers catch crab and they land them, by law they're required to report what they land to us. And that's where that piece comes from, that commercial fisheries landings. And then here's the program that I get to work a lot with, habitat enhancement and artificial reefs. So about 5 years ago, we combined this artificial reef stuff with the public access piece. It's kind of a weird combination of things. The reason why we did that is they both involve a lot of contracts and contractors. And so as far as the public access piece, just so you know, we are required to spend 15% of the federal dollars that we get in through sport fish restoration funds on public access. And the way we choose to do that is, that's actually Village Creek. We just rebuilt that one. It's like building a boat ramp or building a public service dock at a boat ramp or building a fishing pier. We built artificial reefs. We were talking back a minute ago, and he mentioned are they offshore or they inshore, and I'm going to tell you in a minute, I'm going to focus exclusively on offshore reefs. Although we do inshore reefs also, and the inshore reefs are for fishing. The marine habitat license plate, if you haven't seen the one on my hat, I haven't done it yet, you can get that on your car. I will tell you, whichever one of the wildlife plates DNR does, if you choose to buy one, they are the best value in plates you can buy to support a cause. And if you don't believe me, go to the Department of Revenue site, look where the license plates are, and if you want one to support breast cancer awareness, which is a great cause, look, see how much money goes to that. Look at UGA, look at Spay and Neuter Your Pet, look at any of those other things, and those groups get very little of that money. We fought long and hard to make sure that we get, that plate costs you on top of your normal fees $25, and we get 19 of it the first year and $20 every year thereafter, right? And I just challenge you, if you want one of those, any kind of one of those plates to support a cause, go looking where the money goes. People buy like University of Georgia plates, UGA gets very little of the money. Almost it all goes to the general fund. Just I'm on my soapbox now. Funding. This is important because our agency down there, where we have 60 people working, you will notice a third roughly a third is state funds. The rest of the money either comes from EPA for beach water quality and wetlands, NOAA, I already mentioned the Coastal Zone Management Act is about a third of it, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. This is the money where I said 15% has to go back and build boat ramps. That represents 24. We've got some NOAA fisheries money, and then some other is probably that marine habitat license plate money. But I'm telling you that to tell you that most people don't realize that the majority of the 2/3 of the work we do down there to protect the coast of Georgia is done because we have this federal money. The state can dig a little deeper, honestly, I think, but that's where we are with state funding. So some of these slides came out of our director's presentation. I thought you would find this interesting. Again, it has nothing to do with artificial reefs. I'm going to go into that next. But he gave this to the Republican caucus. Part of this presentation, this slide was in there. This is what he considers our top 3 issues for the future of coastal Georgia. That aligns with what y'all think y'all probably aren't worried about employee retention for our people. But the rest of the stuff probably hits pretty home. Sea level rise, permitting versus development, all of these derelict vessels we've got going on, and loss of infrastructure. And that loss of infrastructure means loss of commercial fishing docks, loss of rails to pull shrimp boats out. That's what he meant by that infrastructure. I just left it in there because I thought you'd find that interesting and kind of see how we align with what y'all got going on.
And that picture was less than a block and a half from where that old office.
Yeah. The old Coca-Cola building.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just
And
around the corner.
I'm always amazed at people driving down the road here, taking their kids to school, riding through salt water. And like, don't y'all realize right there on Lanier Boulevard, that one always amazes me. Yeah, that sea level rise thing, people don't realize how serious that one is in coastal Georgia. Mm-hmm. So why build artificial reefs in Georgia? So if you were to go, these are 2 pictures. This actually probably isn't Georgia. This is very similar to what it looks like. If you were to just take a boat and leave out of here and head east and just randomly drop off into the waters of Georgia and go to the bottom of the ocean, it's going to look something like this. It looks like the beach at low tide. I'll tell you, if you think about it, the continental shelf waters off Georgia are basically the lower coastal plain underwater. It's a weird statement, right? Because sea levels have been at different places at different times in our history. So if you think about when you're at the beach, what it looks like at low tide, that's what it looks like. And the reason why it doesn't look like this is there's nothing hard for that stuff to grow on. This picture, I had the photo credit, I've seen that lost this amount. This picture is from Gray's Reef. This picture is a great picture because it's added lots of underwater lighting, because normally you don't get those kind of colors underwater, right? You divers will know you've lost all your reds and oranges. But this is a limestone outcropping, and Gray's Reef is about 12 to 16, 18 miles off due east of Sapelo Island. It's a natural reef. It's Gray's Reef Natural Marine Sanctuary. That'll tell you how important it is. We've elevated it to the point of being a natural marine sanctuary. The reason why Gray's Reef exists is because at some point the tectonic plates shifted, pushing up limestone, and the sand is not covering the limestone, and the limestone is what it takes for things to grow on. Like, we don't have a lot of hard corals. Mostly everything you see out here are barrel sponges and other sponges. There are corals. That's probably a coral there. We do have corals here, but not like the Keys. We're a lot more biologically diverse than the Keys are in our offshore waters where the reefs are, but not as many hard corals. Just kind of keep that in mind. So we've been doing offshore reefs, artificial reefs. I guess I can tell you, artificial reefs, it's not a new concept. The Chinese were doing it 2,000 years ago. Go put something in the ocean to lure fishing. It's not much different than putting a Christmas tree in a farm pond, right? So in Georgia, we've been doing reefs for almost 50 years, or nearly 50 years. And really the reefs we first started with were these reefs here, what I call the nearshore reefs and the offshore reefs, but now we have all this stuff too. So by the numbers, 31 reefs, 3 beach reefs, beach reef, beach reef, beach reef. We had one down here, we're going to add it back, right? 17 nearshore reefs, that's these reefs in here. Beach reefs are permitted as 400 yards in a circle. And almost everything else out here, with the exception of SFC, are permitted as a 2x2 square nautical mile reef. That does not mean that 2x2 square nautical mile area is full of stuff. That's what we have permitted where we can put stuff. We do this different than other states do, because other states permit, when they sink a ship, they permit that individual thing, where we have these reefs permitted. And the reason why, there was a very specific reason why this was done this way. 9 sound systems in Georgia. People were leaving from all these different sound systems. And back in the day before GPS existed, there was a thing called Loran, and Loran A, and Loran C, and before that existed, you were using compasses. And so they were put specifically, so no matter where you live, you could run the compass heading out and find that reef and navigate to the rest of them by compass. And then when Loran C came around, Loran A, and then Loran C made it easier. Now with GPS, everybody's got a GPS, and we've got them on your phone, right? You can go out there and find them. So that having them spread out like that is not as important as it was, but it's still important. So, and nowadays with modern technology and engines, people will run from Savannah and run down here somewhere and fish if they think they can catch fish. They'll run. It used to be, I always joke the first rule of fishing is go no further than you need to go to catch fish, but people don't always do that, right? So then these 8 Navy towers you see, these were tactical towers that we call them the Buford Tactical Towers because the Marine Corps base in Buford, they trained pilots, and the way they trained those pilots, they had these towers. They looked like little bitty oil rigs, like everybody's seen an oil rig on TV, like a little bitty oil rig, and they had all the electronics on them. These fighter pilots were flying over, and they could see them, and they could tell them they're doing right and wrong. A few years back, the Navy retired them all, and we inherited them. And the Navy is supposed to take them and cut them down and lay them in the water. And so we've got these 1 by 1 square nautical mile reefs permitted around them. We haven't done anything to them yet because the Navy hasn't given the money to lay them down and put them underwater because they do all that air training now by satellite. So we're inheriting those. And then we have these, deep water reefs. There's 3 of them. There's 1, 2, there's one that's off this map. They're really for the people that are billfish fishing. They want to be way offshore. They were really to accommodate what they wanted. The other thing you need to know as we talk through this, state waters extend out 3 nautical miles. So from that general shoreline out 3 nautical miles is state waters. So these beach reefs are within state waters. Federal waters extend from 3 to 12 nautical miles. So really this first band is within true federal waters. But then we claim 200 nautical miles, if y'all ever heard it called the Exclusive Economic Zone or the EEZ. We claim that out 200 miles, meaning Japan can't come in and fish within our EEZ, or they can't come in and hunt whales, or they can't do anything within the EEZ that we say they can. It's not really federal waters. We just claim it as a sovereign nation, and all nations do that. It's a little different in the Gulf because the Gulf is shaped different, but on the Atlantic coast, it's out 200 nautical miles as an exclusive economic zone. So what makes a good artificial reef? The first thing that makes a good artificial reef is a mood. And I didn't write it out, but that's a material of opportunity. We don't like to buy anything because everything's so expensive when you're dealing with reefs. We like to have things donated to us. Like we've got a project coming up where this culvert company that builds culverts has a bunch of culvert that either was wrong size, or the lid broke off, or it didn't meet the test of it wasn't rigid enough, and they're going to donate all that concrete to us, and then we have to take it offshore and make an artificial reef out of it. It has to be free of pollutants. It has to either be free of pollutants or be able to be clean when we can put it out. It has to be durable, heavy, and then there's a lot of talk about entrapment, entanglement, because we don't want sea turtles or dolphins. I don't think dolphins aren't really a concern, but any marine mammal or anything to be entrapped in it. So we're real conscious about making sure those things are clean and heavy. We were talking hurricanes back there. I'll give you an example. One of the first things that we put out in our reef program, we put out 2 World War II era Liberty ships. The Liberty ships 440-something feet long. Y'all all know they built them down here. I don't know if these were built here, but they were Liberty ships, right? One off Savannah at J Reef and one at what used to be G Reef off St. Simon's. It's now called HLHA. And so we were talking hurricanes. So in 1979, when Hurricane David sort of sideswiped Savannah, it took that 440-foot-long ship, broke it in half, and moved the 2 sections a mile apart. So when I say durable and heavy, that's a real important characteristic for an artificial reef. You want it to stay on the bottom where you put it. Regulatory authority. I already told you in the previous slide that the state only has regulatory authority over those beach reefs, and we have to issue ourselves a shore protection permit saying where those reefs are. We met all this criteria. So when you get in the federal waters, who does that? Well, believe it or not, it's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. they're the federal agency that allows us to permit those 2x2 and 1x1 square nautical mile areas. They do that through a programmatic general permit is what it's called. They issue the permit to us as the state, and then we can control what goes on those reefs. It's always a 5-year permit. So every 5 years, we go back to the well and we ask for another permit. It's a neat way they permit that. This permit also gets commented on by NOAA, the National Marine Fisheries Service. That whole entanglement and entrapment, this is part of NOAA that is dealing with marine mammals, sea turtles, and want to make sure that we're doing things that are not going to harm those animals. The U.S. Coast Guard comes in as you would expect. Coast Guard is dealing with 2 issues. The Coast Guard is thinking about marine pollution, meaning if we sink a ship, that all the oil is going out of the ship, the engine's either taken out or cleaned. There's nothing that can float away once it's on the bottom. So they're coming at that from a marine environment safety and then a public safety, because we talked about divers back there a minute ago, right before we started. The Coast Guard is worried about a diver doing something and getting trapped in a ship or whatever we put out. So in general, when we do ships or things like that, the doors have to be removed or welded open, or they can't accidentally close. There can't be places they can get trapped, and they're worried about public safety also. And then I did mention our own permits. Believe it or not, when we DNR want to build a dock, like part of the work I do, I have to get a permit from the folks across the hall, like y'all would if y'all want to build a dock. I do the same joyful thing. And then if you want to do that stuff at the beach, you have to get a shore permit. So that's the regulatory authority. I say all that because I feel like, or I hear comments a lot of times from people that sound a lot like, well, you're just putting stuff in the ocean. You're just disposing of stuff in the ocean, and that's not what we're doing. There's a lots of regulatory steps we have to go through. Matter of fact, I put these on there. These are probably the big 3 when somebody wants to know, especially if we're bringing on a contractor that wants to help us reef something. Well, how do we do it? What are the rules? Well, there are no absolute hard and fast rules, but there is, the EPA has national guidance and best practices, a document name. You can Google it. For preparing vessels to create artificial reefs, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission and the Gulf states jointly put out a publication called Guidelines for Marine Artificial Reef Material. What works, what doesn't work. Like, we don't do wooden shrimp boats so they don't sink. We don't like fiberglass boats because they're not heavy enough. We like steel boats. We'll take aluminum boats, but we really don't like aluminum because aluminum doesn't last as long underwater. So it has some of those things laid out in there. And then NOAA's got a National Artificial Reef Plan, basically the same thing for where to put reefs, what they should be made out of, and how to assess them. So there's a lot of guidance that goes on with building artificial reefs. And so then from there, show you kind of what this looked like. I mentioned HLHA, where the Liberty ship is. This is a sailboat. This boat probably went out about 20 years ago. Believe it or not, this boat, history has a weird way of rhyming. I know this boat was people trying to leave Ukraine, and they came into the United States. Coast Guard intercepted them. They ended up giving the boat to us, and we made an artificial reef out of it. It was a sailboat. But you can see, and actually nowadays, we would not be allowed to leave these rails up here. Like I said, this was 20 years ago. But all these holes cut in the boat so nobody can get trapped, and it's going to sink down to the bottom. But what this is a video, real short video, up as I went the wrong way. Let's see. I'm smart to go backwards.
And into that now.
And then let's see if I can make it.
It's down on the bottom. It's probably cheaper there.
No, I did a minute ago.
Yeah, it started. It just gets really tiny. It's right. It's like way.
That looks like, oh, it's because it's saying don't do it, or it's saying do it. I think it's saying don't do it. I did a minute ago by doing that, and then here it comes. This is so here it is sinking. It was anchored in place. It sank. It's very typical when they sink. This is it underwater. This is a couple years later. But so one thing that one of the guys, one of my predecessors, that was one of my mentors growing up at DNR, used to say this. I stole this phrase from him. An artificial reef, the only thing artificial is the substrate. What grows on it is perfectly natural. You can sink a boat like that, and by the time it hits the bottom, fish already come to it to see the bubbles, and they want to see what it is. But it really doesn't start functioning until it gets all that encrusting stuff. You know, it goes through succession like a forest when you've got annelid worm casings growing, and then sponges start, and bryozoans, all these different things, and then all the fish come around. And that's what makes the food web. The big fish swim around to get the little fish. The little fish swim into the structure to get away from it. So that's a good, and then I didn't really go over all the things that we've done. We've used bridge rubble, we've used parts of old industrial sites, we've used lots of ships, lots of boats. This was a unique one. The Army was getting rid of a bunch of tanks, and they had their reservists clean them, so they removed the engines, they removed all the electronics, they removed everything. Basically, that's a hull of a tank that was left. And these were done about 20 years ago also. It's just a great example of showing you what those, what something like that would look like. So you can see sand, like I said, the bottom is just sand, and here this thing sits. A lot of these, when they were shoved off, they ended up having tanks like they were parallel apart, they'd be in a line. And I've dove many of them, and between the tracks of the tanks, group would like to get up under there. Sea turtles like to get up into the tank where the door would open. All that's hollow in there anyway, so it's just the shell of the tank, but it works great. The interesting thing about me saying aluminum boats don't last as long, the oxidation of aluminum still happens underwater, but rust happens very slowly underwater because there's not as much oxygen in the water. So steel things just last longer. But you get the kind of idea of how an artificial reef would work and how it would function.
What's the depth on this wrecks?
L Reef is in the 65 to 75. It might hit 90 feet in some areas. HLHA definitely hits 90 feet. It's the same distance offshore, but the isobath lines come in around HLHA a little. Mainly that near shore set of reefs that I was telling you about. This set here is in the 35 to 45 foot range. This set here is in the 55 to 65 foot range. This is where it kind of dips in and does something weird. This one gets into about 95 feet in some places. These reefs are in the 95 to 120 range. These are several hundred feet deep. And when you get out, so I mentioned Gray's Reef to you. Gray's Reef occurs, you notice we don't have any reefs right here because Gray's Reef National Marine Sanctuary is right in here, right off the Sapelo, right? And then what they call the Sapelo live bottom is a little area in here that has some low relief live bottom on that limestone. And then when you get out here they call it the 40-mile bottom. It's not 40 miles deep, it's 40 miles offshore. There's a patch they call the Savannah Snapper Banks and the Brunswick Snapper Banks. It's a large area that's in about 120 feet of water where there's limestone, there's natural reefs, and then in 600 feet of water somewhere out in this area, there's some really deep reefs they function very similar. You just obviously aren't diving those, and the fish in them is very difficult because you've got to fish so deep. There's some of those protected areas now but a lot of the reef fishermen that fish commercially, they will go out and they'll fish these reefs that are in 200, 300, 400 feet of water using electric reels so they can fish very deep depths. Now, I guess I didn't really say it, but these things are primarily built for fishermen, although we do have a good contingent of divers that dive offshore. You're rarely going to have good visibility in here. I've dove recently at F Reef twice in my career where I had good visibility. I dove recently at SAV, which is really close to shore in Savannah. I mean, I could see the stuff on the beach at Tybee. We were that close, like 6 miles, and it was clear that day for some reason that you get Gulfstream doing this out here, right? Warm water rising, and then it spins off into a littoral current. That's why the islands are always breaking down on the north end and built on the south end, right? The littoral current. So sometimes a slug of blue water will come in with those currents, and you'll get really crazy visibility. It's hard to predict. You get out here, you get more consistent visibilities. Most of the time really good, sometimes they may be bad. And then if you go further, you're gonna get better visibility. It just gets more dangerous diving in deeper water. Last thing I was gonna mention to you guys was, you may have seen it on the news. I already mentioned that culvert pipe that's going out. But along with that culvert pipe, we're gonna you put it on Facebook, we're gonna put these are two MARTA cars that MARTA just decommissioned for this purpose, to try this. Now you can see the windows are gone, the doors are gone, they took everything out of these cars, they're hollow tubes. About 20 years ago, we got a bunch of New York City subway cars, and we did this with them. And some of those New York City subway cars stood real well, and some of them over time sort of flattened out. They still provide hard structure for things to grow on. There's not as large a relief, and you could argue sometimes low relief is better than high relief for what fish you're looking for. Yes, ma'am.
So aside from fishing, what's the purpose? What's the
So you
point
get a lot
of
of
artificial reefs?
a lot of discussion of are the and I don't know that I'm gonna have the answer to this, but I'll tell you what the discussion is. Are we creating habitat for fish, or are we aggregating fish in certain locations? I personally think like we're creating habitat for fish. We would not have, like I told you, the coast of Georgia, if you think back to that map I was showing you, besides Gray's Reef, there would be nowhere else for fish to congregate like that in Georgia. So it really is about creating fish habitat. And we've put ultrasonic receivers on those reefs, right? And nowadays, from sea turtles to great white sharks and every species of fish in between, there's researchers that are tagging these species with those ultrasonic tags, and the technology's gotten so good that we can leave those receivers out for 6 months between battery guns. And we're learning more right now about fish biology, about movement of fish up and down the coast, and turtles and sharks and all that stuff than we've ever known before. So I think you'll probably start hearing more hard studies talking about creating habitat creates more fish. That's the theory, is that we're trying to create more fish. And then it also provides opportunities for fishermen to fish.
Does that help the shrimpers? I read in the paper that the Georgia shrimpers were in real financial problems.
Yeah, this doesn't, because shrimp life history doesn't have anything to do with this far offshore. I will tell you where shrimpers and artificial reefs intersect is those locations we picked for the beach reefs. I told you were close. We put those at locations where shrimpers already knew there were snags, and they wouldn't shrimp there because they would catch their nets on whatever was already down there. It could have been an old wreck of some kind. It could be all sorts of things. So we were very specific, and when we put those, we didn't want to interfere with the shrimpers. But the shrimpers issue is, there's nothing wrong with the shrimp population. You have to know that, right? But what's wrong with the shrimping industry is the imported shrimp coming in, and that is simple supply and demand. They're dumping so much imported shrimp on the market that it drives the price down, that right now our shrimpers aren't even leaving the dock because it doesn't make sense to shrimp.
Yeah, it's real
So it's crazy, but I'll tell you that there's two sides of that story. Shrimping in the Atlantic coast and the Gulf Coast can't supply shrimp to the whole country, and people in Nebraska want to eat shrimp at Captain D's. And I'm not saying that's just a fact. That's not. Nobody knows how to reconcile the problem other than the public, especially here in town. You say you have to say you want to eat wild water shrimp. And people are saying that. I saw a post today on Facebook, and I was reading all the comments, and they were like, well, you should tell your restaurant that you only want wild water shrimp, you only eat wild water shrimp. But there's a second piece of that people have to swallow, no pun intended. You got to expect to pay more.
Yeah.
You got to be willing to pay more, right? Because if you're not willing to pay more, then you're just.
Yeah.
I have a friend that runs the coastal market up in Darien, the groceries to the Piggly Wiggly, and he sells local shrimp, and it's cool enough that he puts. This came off of the boat sailing Auburn. So not only that, not only you know it's local, you know what boat it came off, but he also sells imported shrimp in there. And people come in there when they've got their money out, they will pick up those imported shrimp and not buy the local stuff strictly on price. So I feel like there's two sides. It's one thing to say you absolutely want it. It's another thing to put your money where your mouth is, right? So the MARTA cars, these two are going out along with that concrete I was telling you about a minute ago. MARTA pulled together 8 cars to do this with. MARTA is retiring over the next, I don't know how long, I'm going to say 6 years, something like that. They've got 280 cars to retire. And when they retire them, they pay a company to disassemble them, much like this, and things that can get recycled and things that can't go to the landfill like you would expect. And some of the cars that are old enough, they've got some cars from the 60s and 70s and 80s. And what brought this program around to us twice, we talked to them about it and they thought, well, we can't really do this. They started disassembling the first car, and the interior of it, not this one, but a different one, they had a resin and asbestos mixture that was used to insulate the cars, right?
Yeah.
And their price to disassemble and get rid of went to the roof because of the asbestos. But you have to understand that asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral, and all those guides I showed you about reefing things doesn't say asbestos is bad, because asbestos is not bad. It's a naturally occurring mineral, and actually they have done studies when you put asbestos in the ocean, it's one of the safest places you can put it because it's not friable, you can't breathe it, and bacteria will break that natural mineral down. So asbestos is not a no-no for us in the reef world. And so that's what brought MARTA back around to us, and then they realized the publicity they're going to get off this, and the fact they're doing something good with it, the fact that some of that stuff's not going into a landfill, it just all has to be clean, and it's not cheap to clean them. We went up to Atlanta a month ago to see these cars, and they were breaking them down, and their facility was really impressive, and the amount of effort they were putting into it was really impressive. But this is our first trial run, then we'll get the second batch, which is 8 of the 10, and then if it all works out, over the next 4 or 5 years, they will decommission cars into barge loads. So it doesn't make sense to take 2 cars offshore. It makes sense to take 20 cars or 40 cars, whatever the barge will hold. We're going to do that, and we'll spread them all up and down the coast of those different artificial reefs, and they'll create fish habitat like all these other things have over the years. That's really the last.
Do they also help prevent beach erosion, or?
They're too far offshore for that. Anything that would help with beach erosion would have to be something armored much closer to the beach. And I don't know that you'll ever see that in Georgia. I think you'll continue to see sand being pumped back up. That natural sand sharing system has it moving. So the artificial reefs, they're too far apart to help with that. They're not in any way like an engineered structure would be to help with beach erosion.
And does such a program continue down in Florida?
It does.
As many?
All the Atlantic and Gulf Coast states do artificial reef programs these days. I'm a part of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission is all 15 states, and they all do it on some level. They do it different than we do it. It's really interesting because of that programmatic general permit I told you about that the Corps issues us. We hold that permit. Technically, we could, like if you had a group who wanted to do a reef, you had money and all that, we could give you permission to do it, but we don't do that. If a sport fishing club comes to us and they say, and this happens a good bit, Savannah Sport Fishing Club is a good example, or CCA, we've raised $40,000, we want to build a reef. We go, all right, how about you let us build the reef, you pay for it, we'll share the publicity, and we do it. I say that because Florida does it different. They have one reef coordinator, and the counties in Florida all around the state actually do the reef building. And they want to do it because it promotes tourism, and it helps bring people to their county to fish. So they have a whole different model than what we have. So I really think the way we do it, of course I would, right? But I really think the way that we do it is a much better way because we have a lot more say-so in what goes out there. And when we put a lot of effort into it, a lot of thought into it, I get real touchy when, like, the guys from MARTA, like, well, the engineers are like, well, we'll dispose of these offshore. So please take the word dispose out of your vocabulary. We're going to enhance an artificial reef. Dispose sounds like you're getting rid of something you don't want. We'll just tow it out in the ocean and put it there. And that's not what it is at all. Because we turn a lot of things down that we don't want. So, we take things like concrete, some of the best, because it mimics concrete and limestone are so similar. It works out really well. Steel works really well. Those are two of our favorite things, and I gotta clean it up well. I will tell you, like, next week we're taking a tugboat out. It's down in St. Mary's right now. We got a tugboat at Darius needs to go out. We got a barge. When barges get to be when they're not serviceable anymore, it is much cheaper to take something out that is already floating and sink it like that sailboat. Costs a fraction of the amount of money. I love those. Like, we decommissioned the shrimp boat out of Darien a couple of years ago. We bought the boat from the shrimper. It gave him money to get into his next boat. We paid to clean the boat up. We paid your neighbors tow it offshore and sink it. And that's just a great way to do it because it helps everybody out. It's a lot less expensive. When you do what we're doing with these subway cars and you have to rent a barge and a crane on the barge or a piece of machinery to move stuff off the barge, prices just go up. It's just, it's really expensive. Who else? Go ahead.
So when you're sinking this, are you controlling how it lands on the floor or?
No, we talked about with these two subway cars of using a sling to lower them down, and you can do that. Most of the time things get pushed off the barge just at the surface, and they land how they land. Believe it or not, most ships when we sink them, because they're designed to be heavier at the bottom, they land right side up or maybe laying on their side. Sailboats always do, obviously, is the keel. But we're not controlling them. But I guess I didn't mention this, that permit has specific clearances that, because that's open ocean where we're putting this stuff. So there's a certain amount of water above the reef that you have to have so if a ship goes by, they won't. Yeah. All that's taken into consideration. We're never anywhere near any danger. Even when they tell us we got to have 40 feet of vertical clearance, we're still leaving more than that usually. But yeah, we do that also. So no, any ship that's going by, or boat, or sailboat, or pleasure boat, there's no worry of the stuff deep enough underwater. We did take the bronze prop from the Golden Ray and put it at SFC, and they took the rudder from the Golden Ray and set it on the bottom of the crane and set the big bronze prop on top of it because we didn't want to do it. We thought with the sharp blades it might sink into the bottom of the ocean. And I had dove it, and it's loaded with fish. It's incredible. It was funny because everybody was looking at their brain like, what did this thing weigh? It's made of bronze. I mean, short of gold or silver, bronze is highly valuable. But it's kind of like when your car's totaled. They considered that prop to be total, and they didn't want to sell it. That's what Hyundai Moses wanted to do with it. So they took it offshore. They paid for it. We put it out there too. So we've had some strange things over the years for reefs, but they work. You dive them and you see fish, you see turtles. Turtles like to get under ledges at Gray's Reef, like natural limestone. They like to get under there and hang out, kind of as a safe place to be. They'll do the same thing. A ship will be sitting there and they'll scour out, and they'll have a little nook, they'll hide up under there. I guess it feels safe for them. So it does mimic the natural landscape in a lot of ways. So.
Do you have a department that solicits donations, or do you have so much that's coming?
We don't. I wouldn't say we have too much. We have usual suspects that will call us. I wish there was a law that I was watching on Facebook today. They're taking it down the Island Expressway Bridge, and so I guess one of the timing or whatever. The barge is there, and the crane's there, and they put this concrete in the barge. And why that doesn't go offshore to be an artificial reef, it has to do with contracts, and it's not in the contract and all that. But I wish there was a law that any time any bridge was taken down in our coastal zone, that they were required to take it out there. But I got a call a week and a half ago. This guy, he called the front desk, asked about the reef program. He gets me because I run the reef program. And he says, "Hey, we're putting in a bid to." They call it the steamship dock. I don't know which one it is, why it's called that, but it's up in Savannah Harbor. We're getting paid to decommission it. Can we put the concrete on one of your offshore reefs? And I was like, yes. And I explained to him the PGP and how it works. And that makes us very nimble. That's the best thing you can be when you're dealing with contractors. They can't wait. Time is money for them. So we can be very nimble in the way that we take that concrete. That's hence the materials of opportunity. And he said, okay, I got all the information. If we get the contract, I'll call you back. And that PGP allows us to, if he calls me in 2 months or 2 years and says, we're ready to do this, we send a letter out, it goes to the Coast Guard and the Corps of Engineers, all those people saying, we intend to put this concrete out, we have a 10-day waiting period, because it's already approved. That 10 days is in case somebody raises their hand and say, I don't think you should for some reason. Then we can put that material out. Otherwise, if you were permitting each individual reef, permitting process, right now, we've got projects we're waiting on the permitting process through the Corps. It's taking a long time. I don't know, 6 weeks, 6 months, year and a half, and you never know how long it's going to be.
For more reefs.
to permit, if you were going to permit an absolute new reef.
Yeah,
So
so
wait.
right now you're just adding on to what you have.
Those 31 that we have, and there's plenty of room. We could do this for 50 or 100 more years. We never fill them up. We never be worried about, oh no, we got nowhere else to put something on that reef. I don't think we'd ever get there. Because we do so little of it, really. We do 2 to 6 projects a year, maybe, funding related, because it's really expensive. And so that's not one of our issues, is doing that. Is running out of space. Anybody else have a question for me? Any other DNR questions I'm not going to answer? I've been there. In a couple of weeks, I'll be starting my 30th year.
Are there other countries or entities around the world that are doing things more advanced than what you're doing and are able to, because of regulations or just technology?
I think in the advanced part, I've wanted to see our people do some of our cooperating researchers get into some of this. They are doing a fair amount of 3D printing with concrete. Like you see, they print houses and things nowadays in other parts of the world. I don't know if many people are doing it here, but you could 3D print things with cement and concrete that can mimic more natural reefs. There's companies that are 3D printing objects, so especially when you're talking about protecting the beach, so when you place them together, they lock together kind of thing, and they're doing some of that stuff. It's probably on the more advanced side. I think there's an opportunity for engineered structures that you could do, but all that stuff costs more money. There are engineered structures we can buy, like you've seen in years past. The Coast Guard have big pallet balls that they make. It's a round reef structure. The company calls them pallet balls, and they work really well, but they're really expensive. So when you take a culvert pipe that somebody's going to give me for free, I got to pay to ship both of them. This item's free. That item costs $1,000 or something. That I'm going to take the free item, you know. But I do think there's an opportunity in the future for building reefs, especially if you want to track certain corals or certain species. You could do that with 3D printing, where if you had specific goals in your project. Some of these, I often wonder, and I'm not a climate scientist, I often wonder with all the coral bleaching and things going on in the Caribbean and warming water temperatures, if you're going to see those things start moving. I mean, you're already seeing that with like lionfish moving here more, even though they're invasive. They can do it now because the waters are warmer and some of those things that we didn't used to see. Mangroves. Yeah, we'll have mangroves. They're in St. Augustine.
Does Georgia,
There they find them.
Did you know that there was that they found some mangroves? You know the lodge, the Sea Island Golf Course, the big flags, mangroves there. We assume the landowner planted them, trying to, because they cause bank accretion because of the way the roots go. And so our Eamon, our plant biologist, they went out and cut them down and put poison on them. But they were there. Yeah.
Well, I heard they survived in Amelia Island, and they're showing up, starting to grow in Cumberland, but not surviving.
do you all plant any type of hard coral?
We don't, and we've had people ask that before. I had a guy call and wanted to know, he had seen something on TV, and he wanted to know, could you grow live rock, where you do it in an aquarium and get stuff growing and take it out there? And like, that's not our issue. Our issue is not that we don't have the animals, we don't have the place for them to grow. If you put it out there, something's going to grow on it, you know. And it's and there are hard corals. There's the reef that's named CDH Reef. I can show it to you. It's about 12 miles off Cumberland. It's one of my favorite reefs to dive. CDH used to be called Sea Reef, used to be called WR2. That is the reef where the Oklahoma, and somebody tell me the other boat's name that was sank during the German U-boat sank, the Sparta. The Oklahoma, they pulled in the Sparta, they didn't. I had dove the boiler, it's about as big as this part of the room, the steam part of that, and there were coral heads growing on there. I mean, it's been there at that time 70 years. There's corals growing on there that are massive because it's been down there long enough. But some of that stuff's just not, I mean, it's 50 years old or 30 years old or 40 years old. It's just not, He'll get there, you'll see coral heads that big. But I told that guy that wanted to grow the corals in live rock, like, you know, if you really want to get into something like that, it's going to cost a lot of money to do that would be helpful to the coast. We don't have an oyster hatchery, and we talked about we're trying to get into oyster aquaculture, and UGA has been carrying the lion's share of that because they're doing research on oysters and all the aquaculture. But they can't, when the industry really gets up and running, there's going to have to be private hatcheries somewhere. Somebody's going to have to fund a private hatchery or two eventually, because the UGA won't be able to keep up. They're doing it right now because they're studying it. But if you want to spend a whole bunch of money doing something real similar, open an oyster hatchery. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I noticed on one slide it said that 4 of those four were permitted and 1 was operational. Why aren't the other 3 operational?
Which was that the oyster slide?
Yeah,
That's a good question. Let me go back to it. See if I can see that. There we go.
Yeah, 4.
Okay. It's Corps of Engineers. It's permitting. With the Corps of Engineers, and we have about 5 or 6 associates that left our agency over the last 4 or 5 years and went to work for the Corps of Engineers. I know some of them personally, but the rules have changed a little bit, and where the Corps used to do things, I'm not sure what the problem is, but that they're not moving fast. And all that, and you don't know how long it's going to take. I've got a grant that we're going to redo Champion boat ramp in Darien. We got the money, we had it for a year, we're ready to do it, we're waiting on Corps permits, and that's what was holding. Part of that is they've never permitted oyster aquaculture in Georgia, so everything's new to them. But it's just taken. I mean, it's very politically charged right now. You know, there's one guy. If you're a Facebooker and you go to, I think it's called Bull River Oyster Ranch. It's up in the Bull River up in Savannah. They were running that. They put their first oysters out for aquaculture, and they're supposed to be ready sometime this fall. But they're doing a good job of documenting. You see how big they're growing and showing timely updates. I like watching them. I get to see what they're doing. But all that was permitting related.
Is that where the lobbyist would come into play, to help?
It could. And I know that Charlie Phillips is one of those people that is very well connected and knows a lot of people. He does a lot of stuff like that, and I'm sure he's got friends that are doing that. But yeah, that's where, we can't call the Corps of Engineers, or we can't call. I know that several of the growers got together and met with Buddy Carter, and Buddy Carter called the Corps and said, "What the heck's going on? You're standing in the way of business in the state of Georgia," you know, and that has probably helped. But we can't call Buddy Carter's office and go, "Hey, this isn't right. You need to do something about the Corps of Engineers." That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Our hands are tied. That's when, that's probably a good example of one of those things that could be partnered with. Because oysters clean water. Oysters do good things for the environment. Yes, sir.
I assume because the reefs are so deep that the warming of the water has no impact on your activities?
Not for us. It's probably only going to increase the diversity of the reef program. Like something like climate science, ocean acidification, if that happens, would be something we would be worried about. And the migration and displacement of species might be because it's according to what you like to fish for, it's according to what you want to protect or what you think is normal. I know that our chief of fisheries left. He moved here from Virginia. He left to go back to Virginia. I talked to him time to time. They had the biggest shrimp season in Virginia they ever had, and they think it's 1 or 2 degrees of water warming up there. It's just changing where things can live and can't live. So it can be bad, it can be good, it's according to what you're managing for, I guess.